This week we spoke with the sister writing team, Maika and Maritza Moulite, about their latest book, One of the Good Ones.
We were really drawn to the issue of police brutality and racial injustice, and we learned about the Negro Motorist Green Book and wanted to incorporate that into a story as well.
Welcome to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline. I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and with me on this very cold, wintry day is my mother, Caroline Kilborn. Hi, Mom.
Hi. Well, at least it's not snowing.
For at the moment.
Yeah, okay, all right.
You can't speak for tomorrow or this afternoon or whatever.
Well, it's Iowa and it's winter, so I guess there you go.
That is true. So, Mom, this is, we're recording this in February. This will air originally in February, and February is Black History Month. So the book we have today is really quite suitable or quite relevant.
Yes.
Quite relevant
yes,
for
it
that,
is.
isn't it?
Indeed. It's the title is One of the Good Ones, and it's written by, it's joint authorship by two sisters, excuse me, Maika and Maritza Moulite. Okay, and okay. You want a short biography on both of them, or
yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Okay, Maika is a Miami native and the daughter of Haitian immigrants. She earned a bachelor's in marketing from Florida State University and an MBA from the University of Miami. And when she's not using her digital prowess to help nonprofits and major organizations tell their stories, she's sharpening her skills as a PhD student at Howard University. She's the eldest of four sisters and loves young adult fantasy, fierce female leads, and laughing. And her sister, Maritza, graduated from the University of Florida with a bachelor's in women's studies and the University of Southern California with a master's in journalism. She's worked in various capacities for NBC News, CNN, and USA Today. An admirer of Michelle Obama, she is a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania, exploring ways to improve literacy in under-resourced communities. Her favorite song is September by Earth, Wind, and Fire. Welcome, ladies. Welcome, ladies.
Welcome to Writers' Voices. Yeah. So your sisters, how far apart in age are you? Do you mind if we ask that?
We're about 2 years, or almost 2 years apart.
Okay, and you have other siblings as well.
Yes, we're the two oldest of four women.
Oh, and this is the second book that you've written together, I understand.
It is.
It is. And what made you decide to start writing books together?
Yes, so really, I think it just came down to us being disillusioned with life after college, if I'm being honest. I know for myself, I had been out of school for a few years, and I had my own business and ended up moving away from that and working in, I guess, more of a corporate America type of setting. And I was like, ooh, this is not what I want to be doing. And Maritza had, I believe, just recently graduated from her master's program in journalism, and she was starting to realize that she didn't exactly feel like she wanted to continue working in that industry in that capacity. So we have grown up really like reading a ton of books when we were younger because our parents didn't allow us to watch TV during the weekdays. So we went to the library every weekend, and we would max out the number of books that we could bring home. And because we read so many of them, Maritza and I were just like, well, why don't we try to write a book that we wish we could have had when we were growing up? And so that started our journey to writing our first book, Dear Haiti, Love Elaine, and now we're on our second book with One of the Good Ones.
Well, that story sounds a little familiar, doesn't it, Mom? Not being allowed to watch TV and checking as many books as possible out of the library. Of course, the TV options weren't as great when I was that age. I'm a bit older than you ladies are. But yeah, I know that story.
It's so interesting when we tell it and other people are like, oh my goodness, my parents were like this too.
It's always alone. It's always so funny to find fellow compatriots.
Yes, yeah. So what were your favorite books as a young woman? As a teenager, or let's say middle reader?
So some of the books that have stayed with me for the longest now are, it's funny, like, we like to point out that a lot of the books that we read growing up were about light girls with red hair. It just seems to be a thing, like, we're just jumped it up. So, like, Pippi Longstocking and Anne of Green Gables, what else? Anastasia Krupnik. Oh, the Alice McKinley series by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor. We really loved reading those books. Any type of story that was about, like, a girl who was kind of spunky or a little shy or felt like she was smart and was just going through her life. We were really drawn to those stories. But then we also really liked the books that were about, like, princesses from around the world. I don't remember what the series is called. Do you remember, Maika?
I don't remember. I just remember reading about Anastasia from the Romanov dynasty in Russia.
Yeah.
We were reading all types of books.
Beautiful covers.
So in my day, that would have been the Nancy Drew mysteries.
Ooh, we read those too.
Yeah, we didn't read the Hardy Boys. We're like, why read the Hardy Boys when we have Nancy Drew right here? So.
Well, that is true. And then there was Cherry Ames, Student Nurse. And I don't remember why I liked that, but I did. And but now there's some great options. One of you is really into young adult fantasy. So doesn't it seem like women tend to be the heroines in that a lot of the time?
Yes. I mean, at least the books that I've read, they tend to have or I will say, I seek out the books where women are the protagonists.
Okay.
And so for me, I just really enjoy them. I love anything that's a little bit fantastical, magical realism, any of that. I don't know. I guess it's the imaginative person that I am. Like, I just really enjoy that type of media, if you will. But I'm really excited to see how there's been, especially in YA, more fantasy books that feature Black girls. I wish that I had books like these when I was growing up, because even, as a reader, you'll go through things and you'll read it and you're putting yourself in the position. Like, you're just imagining that you are the main character. And there are definitely times as a reader that I'm like, okay, this totally wasn't right for me, but I'm totally still digging it. Like, if they said, oh, I blushed and my face got really red, and I'm like, not so much for me, but still enjoying the story. But yeah, so I totally love fantasy. I do seek the books that have women as leads, and yeah, I think it's just maybe like a metaphor for the kind of life that I want to live in real life, like women taking charge.
Well, what are some of the books that you would recommend that have African American female leads?
Ooh, yes. Okay, so I have my Libby app. I'm literally pulling it up because I'm like, let me pull out the recommendations here. Okay, so in terms of fantasy, this is on my TBR. I haven't read it yet, but it's gotten a ton of buzz. It's called Legend Born by Tracy Dion. It's a retelling of the King Arthur stories, and I'm really, really excited to read that. Let's see, what else do I have for you? I'm
going to pause you just a second. We suddenly are getting an echo. Did anyone change anything in how they were connected?
No.
Nope. Okay, so try again.
Can you hear me now?
I'll mute myself now.
No, you're fine now. Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Yes. And another recommendation that I have is A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow. It's about sirens, like mermaids, but in this world, sirens are Black women, and it's really talking about this metaphor of, like, in the mythology of mermaids and sirens, that there is power in their voice, and when they sing, they're able to control people. So in this story, it's taken that and adding in a layer of maybe like a social commentary about race and how Black women are silent. And it's just a really intricate story about a mermaid, and she has a friend who's kind of become a sister to her, and the life that develops for them and the antics that ensue. But it's a really interesting story. So I'll stop at 2, but I can keep going.
Now, Mom, let's go back to another generation. Were there any books with female leads when you were a girl?
Oh, gosh. Come on, Monica. Well, of course, there probably were. Nancy Drew was probably even then, but I don't know. I can't remember. I really can't.
Probably not as many, that's for sure.
No,
that's
probably
for
not.
Sure.
Uh-uh.
Okay, so let's get back to the writing of The Good Ones and also your first book, because I'm really curious about how the two of you work together as writers. Who comes up with the initial idea, or is it joint? Do you sit down and brainstorm? And how do you decide what you're going to write? This is just really fascinating to me.
For our idea process, it is kind of like, I feel like we talk about it and it's like we have 2 books, but those are 2 books. So for Dear Haiti, Love Elaine, Elaine came to us kind of like fully formed. She just was this really confident, just really sure, sincere teenage girl who had some dreams. She wanted to be closer to her mom, and she had a wonderful relationship with her dad, and she was just so snarky and clever and just everything we would have wanted to be in high school. I do remember Maika having like an idea for years before we even wrote anything about like a girl who's learning about her mom's family. So I think that at the end of the day, like that was the nugget that really.
So you're going to give your sister credit for that one.
Yeah.
Oh.
And for one of the good ones, it was honestly like the context of the story that came first, and then we started to create characters who would fit into this world. We were really drawn to talk about the issue of police brutality and racial injustice in this country, and we learned about the Negro Motorist Green Book and wanted to incorporate that into a story as well. And then we thought, you know what, we are the older sisters of 4 women, and it would be more personal for us and something that we would really dig into if we were talking about sisters who lost another sister. And then we came up with Jenny and Happy and Kezzy and their family and their friends and their loved ones.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guests today are Maika and Maritza Moulite, and they're the author of One of the Good Ones. So when you sit down to write, are you together? Are you, do you like outline and then like say you take these chapters and I take these, or how does that work?
Yes. So the way that we write, we aren't usually together. Maritza and I have, we write in 2 different styles. So I'm a pantser, which means I write by the seat of my pants, and Maritza's a plotter, so she plots everything out. And so we essentially meet in the middle, have this really extensive outline and all that good stuff. But when it comes down to actually writing, we just hop in. One person will write one scene, I'll write the next. We don't write at the same time. I'm a night owl. Maritza is I don't even know what you call it. What do you call people who wake up early? An early bird. Yes. So Maritza's an early bird and I'm a night owl, and we will tend to write on our own time. But what we'll do is that we always make sure that we read what the other person wrote, so that way we can comb through it, inject our sensibilities, make it cohesive, and sound as if one person has written it. But yeah, we don't write at the same time, although there are times when we do overlap. And we use Google Docs mostly for our collaboration. And it's great because you see when somebody's in the doc, and we'll send each other annoying messages like, "Ew, you suck," or "Oh, go away," or "I'm right behind you," even though we're not.
So, yeah, they say the early bird gets the worm, but, the early worm gets eaten.
Exactly.
So I had assumed that each of you would have written one of you would have written all of Kezi's chapters and another one all of Happy's chapters, but it doesn't sound like that's the way you do it.
No, and it's so crazy because now that people have been telling that to us, we're like, oh, yes. But, yeah, I think it's fun this way, though, because we really do feel invested in all of the characters, and it ends up being an even amount of work because you are just going in and putting your fingerprint all over the story.
Okay, so what happens, though, if you finish writing at night and you have an idea of where the story's going next, but then Maritza writes the next morning and takes it in a completely different direction?
Yeah, so we have a really extensive outline that we make before we even get started writing. Because since there's two of us, we have to know where the story is headed. Because although we like to joke that we share a brain, we don't actually, unfortunately. So we can't speak to each other telepathically. So we have this, the outline, and it can be anywhere from 10 to 30 pages long. We really get in and we break it down. So we'll start out looking at the story from the 5-act story structure, and then we will plot everything along the 5 acts. And then after that, we will get into the nitty-gritty really between each of those acts to see what needs to happen to help push the story along. And then when we're done with that, we just get started, because at that point, the outline is so extensive. It's 30 pages long. We know exactly what needs to happen, but we still aren't writing everything, so we have room for the spirit to move us. And what ends up happening is that we'll just go along for that ride. If I'm writing and I say, hey, I want to try this, and Maritza agrees to it, then we're like, all right, cool, we'll do that. And we have similar sensibilities. It might be because our parents were so strict and kept me, Maritza, and our 2 younger sisters, Jessica and Lydia, and in our bubble, really. So we have a lot of similarities, and we view a lot of things the same way. But we have a rule that if anything gets to a point where we are having a disagreement, whoever is most passionate about her point wins, because we feel like that will make the story better. So we will just have literally, it's like a mini debate. I think this should happen. Well, I think this should happen. And we'll go back and forth, and we're like, who's most passionate here? And then we'll be like, all right, you're most passionate, so you win. And in the rare instances where we can't figure it out between the two of us, we have our sisters, our mom, our dad, our grandma, our 2 dogs. We just start asking other people.
Everybody gets a vote?
Yeah.
That's great. Now, you have 2 younger sisters. Are they jealous about this thing that you share?
Our 2 sisters are, our 2 sisters and our mom and our dad and our grandma are our biggest fans, and they also keep us very humble. But it's been really wonderful to go through this process with them, because it feels very much like a family affair. Because even with things in the story, if we're asking them to break a tie between the 2 of us, or for one of the good ones, it's a thriller as well as a contemporary novel. And our youngest sister, Leanne, is this huge true crime buff, and we were picking her brain the entire time that we were writing the story. So actually being able to read one of the good ones with her afterwards, and seeing her be really excited and proud, was just a very wonderful moment. Yeah.
Well,
and our sister Jessica.
I was gonna say our sister Jessica, when she read Dear Haiti Love Elaine, she was living in New York at the time, and she said that she was literally crying on the train. And she got to the end of the book. So our whole family is just really proud of us. Our dad likes to joke that he will he'll just be at home okay, I'm gonna take your book to your uncle's house so I can show off. Or our mom is our saleswoman, and our grandma is telling everyone. So the whole family, everybody's really involved and excited.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what the story is actually about. I mean, we've kind of mentioned a few things, but why don't you give us a good summary of one of the good ones?
Well, one of the good ones is about 17-year-old, just turned 18-year-old Kezzy Smith, who dies under very mysterious circumstances in police custody. It's her first social justice rally that she has attended because she is a burgeoning social justice activist. She has a very popular YouTube page where she speaks out about injustices in the country and around the world. So it is a very huge shock when she dies in this very scary way. There isn't a not scary way to die, but it's a very big shock when she dies in this very public, terrible, mysterious way. So to commemorate their history buff sister's life, Happy and Jenny Smith decided to embark on a journey using Kezzy's heirloom copy of the Negro Motorist Green Book. And we're biased, but we do think that one of the good ones will definitely leave you shook and wondering what it really means to be an ally.
Let's talk about that. Can we talk about that Green Book a little bit? It was written by Victor Hugo Green. I understand. And
yes,
and it was he wrote that with the hope that someday this guidebook would no longer have to be published because Black patrons would be welcome everywhere. I think that was the fact that he did that helped a lot of people, I'm sure, didn't it?
Yes. So Victor Hugo Green was a U.S. postal worker, and essentially he created the Negro Motorist Green Book, and it was published from 1936 to 1966 to help Black people be able to safely travel across the United States during the Jim Crow era. So during this time, it was also when automobiles were starting to be more widely accessible to the larger American public, and folks were embarking on cross-country road trips because it was something that they hadn't had the ability to do before. But for Black people, they weren't able to move and go through spaces freely because of the times that that the country was going through in terms of the Jim Crow era and segregation. And so there were places where Black folks might not be served or might even face death. And the Negro Motorist Green Book was essentially created as this guide to help Black folks and other marginalized people too used it to be able to travel safely. And we were learning so many things about American history as we were going through this process, things that we weren't taught while we were in school. And one of the reasons why the Negro Motorist Green Book was needed is because there were things called sundown towns. And those are towns where once the sun went down, even if you were working there, if you had a job, if you were Black, you needed to be gone before the sun went down, or grave harm could happen to you. So these towns, they don't disappear. They're still here. They might not, force Black people to leave when the sun goes down in the same capacity, but that history is still very much alive there. In fact, when we were looking at the summer of racial unrest, as it's being called, the summer of 2020, many of the places that were having a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests were places that were sundown towns. So it's really interesting to see, and it was important for us to highlight this history because there's no way for you to have conversations about race in America without taking a look at the past. Now, did you know about the Green Book? Is that something you grew up knowing about, like these girls in your book did?
No, and it was a really big surprise to learn about it because we hadn't learned about it in school, and I thought it was such an interesting cultural artifact. It was unsurprising that such an item had to exist, but I was just so taken aback that it was so far-reaching and widely published, and the Green Book was just one. It was the most successful of a genre of travel guides used for Black people and other marginalized people so that they could travel safely across the country. And it just was an invisible part of American history, which often happens with Black history.
Wow. Now, I'm sure that you wrote this before the show came out, but Lovecraft Country, did you see that? Did you say it was
Yes,
an HBO series? Lisa? Yeah, and they had a version of the Green Book and Sundown Towns. Wow, terrifying. It was terrifying. Yeah.
Lovecraft Country was really interesting because it has creatures of horror in it, like monsters, but you don't know who you should be more afraid of, the fictional beings or entities in the story or the actual people who are causing harm. So it's a really intense tug of war when you're watching it, but I really enjoy that show.
Wow. Yeah. So in one of the good ones, the sisters don't get along quite as well as you two. And there's a lot of friction. Was that hard for you to write that, the friction between Happy and her sisters?
It was so easy.
We don't always get along, we're sisters.
Oh, okay.
So, writing this book was incredibly difficult because of the subject matter, but those little moments of, sisterly bickering, that is something that is taken straight from the pages of our own lives, growing up and having to argue with your sister about her taking too long in the bathroom. And even though the four of us are incredibly close and, I don't think I'm making a good case for us, but even though the four of us really love each other and are very close friends, it still happens where you have those moments where you don't feel like you fit in with the others, and you might feel like the three of them are ganging up on you, or they're not understanding something that you're trying to say, or there's a fundamental part of who you are that you can't reveal to another person. And those are those moments that we wanted to reveal in our characters. And it was a hard thing to write, but also very easy.
Okay, so yeah, and for Happy, is that how you pronounce her name? Is Happy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy.
She, her last interaction with her sister before she died was really not a very positive one. And man, that really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? That, wow, what if this were the last thing that I ever got to say to this member of my family?
Yeah. I mean, this book is absolutely a tale about grief. And, what the family is going through is already unfortunate because they've lost a loved one, but then they are having to go through that grieving process in the public eye. And it was important for us to highlight the family members and the loved ones and relatives and friends who are left behind in the midst of these very public tragedies, because so often the humanity of Black people is ripped away. It just seems as if you are this Black person who maybe something happens and that's it. There's nothing to them but their Blackness and whatever the incident was. But no, they had a life. They had a past. They wanted to have a future. And so Happy had to contend with the fact that her relationship with Kezi, and honestly the rest of her family, wasn't as great as it could be. And that is a reality for folks. When you have someone who passes away suddenly and you don't get to reconcile everything that you might have wanted to say, that's a really tough thing to go through. And Happy goes throughout this entire process where she's having to learn more about Kezi after the fact, in the wake of her death. And it's a really, we try to stay true to that because it's not always, very neat, the ways in which we grieve.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guests today are Maika and Maritza Moulite. Why don't you read a little bit from one of the good ones, and then we'll talk some more about the meaning of the title.
Sounds good. Let's do it. So we are going to read the first chapter, and this is right where the story kicks off. So Maritza will go ahead and get us started.
Chapter 1, Happy. Thursday, July 26th, 3 months, 9 days since the arrest, Chicago, Illinois. She was mine before she was anyone else's. All mine. Partly mine. Now she belongs to you and them and shirts and rallies and songs and documentaries. They say she had a bright future ahead of her, and she was a star whose light burned out too soon. She was going to make a difference. That's all true, but it's not the truth. Kezzy was more than her brains and her grades and her voice. She was more than her future. She had a past. She was living her present. She could have been mine. Should have been mine. She was my sister before she became your martyr, after all. Even as I sit as still as a lion stalking her prey, inside I'm racing. My mind is buzzing with the thoughts I don't say. My heart is knocking erratically against my sternum and is always one beat away from bursting through my chest. I should be used to it. But you never get used to strangers sliding their arms over your shoulders in solidarity to apologize for something that isn't their fault. Not when Kezzy being gone doesn't feel real to begin with. How can it, when I didn't get a chance to see her face one last time before they incinerated her body and put her essence in an urn? My parents are already inside the auditorium, seated in their place of honor in the front row. I will join them eventually, but not until the millisecond that I have to. When everything went down, we made an agreement. I will play along and be a cheap carbon copy of the daughter they lost, a constant reminder to the world that she was one of the good ones. But before the lights shine on us and cell phones are trained at our brave, heartbroken faces, I will be me, the prodigal daughter. I glanced at my own phone. Nothing. New phone, who dis, I guess. I think into the hard bench outside of the Harold Washington Theater, where the National Alliance for the Progression of Black People Chicago chapter is hosting its annual Salute to Excellence ceremony. I try to breathe. I don't want to salute anything. I don't want to be in there. I just want to pretend that this slab of wood is a cloud, that I'm a regular girl lying outside and soaking up the final drops of sunshine at the end of a mundane day. They call it the golden hour, a photographer told me a few weeks ago, when we were waiting for my mother to be finished with makeup for a photo shoot that Essence magazine was doing about America's new civil rights leaders, the new normal. He was fiddling with his camera, removing and reattaching the giant zoom lens of his Canon, and was apparently one of those people who couldn't stand silence. Others see me and can't help but speak. I can read the panic in their eyes when the realization crawls into their psyches. Come on, say something nice, don't sound stupid. But instead of the I'm so sorry and the you're so brave, he was prattled on about the magical moments just after the sun rises and right before it sets. It was a breath of fresh air, actually. Way less shadow, he said. Nowhere for your subject to hide. I think my sister mentioned it to me once, I volunteered. She was a YouTuber. His eyes widened in terror. Of course. Oh, yeah. Oh, man, it's fine. I had spoken too soon. That was then. Now I'm wondering how long you have to sit outside to get a tan when I sense the shifting of light through my closed eyelids. Someone is standing over me and blocking the sun. My heart is no longer knocking at my chest. It is about to crack through my rib cage, my gut, my skin, my top, like a bullet, only bigger. My eyes spring open, and I hurl my purse across my body reflexively. Dumb. Any deranged rando can recognize you out here and, ow! It's even worse than I thought. It's Jenny.
What are you doing here, I asked. She's an integrative biologist and basically lives in her laboratory. Mom, Dad, and I had been visiting Chicago for a few days, but Jenny stayed behind in Los Angeles. I didn't mind. I just got in, Jenny says as she rubs her shoulder. Bummer. I was aiming for the face. She hands me my bag. Why are you not inside? They're about to start. This is my alone time, I say. I stretch with my arms wide above my head until I notice a blond man parked in a car across the street watching in interest. Our eyes meet. He smiles. I frown and hunch over instinctively. We are never alone. Beep, beep, beep. And that's my cue. I stop the alarm and switch my phone to silence. Any messages from Santiago will have to wait. Not that he's going to answer anyway. Sorry, I mutter. She shakes her head. Nah, I get it. I shouldn't have surprised you like that. I don't know what I was thinking. We're never on the same page. This is weird. I shrug as I heave myself up to smooth the black cigarette pants I convinced Mom to let me wear and adjust my tucked-in, ruffled beige blouse. I thought you said you couldn't make it. I glanced at her from the corner of my eyes. She's rolling an enormous hard side spinner suitcase back and forth on the sidewalk. It's a sensible black, of course, but surprisingly large for an overnight trip. And I'm supposed to be the vain one. Jenny pauses mid-spin. I moved some things around. Kezzy was always going on about how important Chicago is to Black history. She told me over lunch that Obama moved here before law school partly because of this guy. She looks at the doors of the theater behind us, at the clunky neon letters that spell Harold Washington, the first Black mayor of Chicago. Oh, I thought it was because of Michelle's pheromones. She blinks. Over at lunch. I hate when she does this. Gushes about all the sisterly things they had without me. Resentment oozes through my pores when I remember that so many of Jenny's memories with our middle sister are more recent than mine. I was only a year younger than Kezzy and had lunch with her exactly once since starting high school. Jenny and Kezzy were about 7 years apart, and they had a standing weekly date. I hate myself for wanting to compete for the title of closest to Kezzy. And for what? I lose every time. None of that will bring her back. We enter the theater, and I don't stop to wait for Jenny, who is asking an usher to store her luggage someplace safe. I keep walking, on the brink of jogging, anything to make the gazes that follow me down the aisle of the auditorium a blur, inhuman. I plunk down into my seat, and with none of the grace and class that years of ballet, tap, and jazz lessons would suggest I have, or what 17 years of having Naomi Smith as a mother would demand. Let the public consumption of our misery begin, I whisper as I cross my arms.
And that was Maika and Maritza Moulite reading from One of the Good Ones. So, One of the Good Ones. Tell us why that title.
Yes, so we selected this title because so often when something happens to a Black person, especially in the media and when it comes to these conversations that people have one-on-one, it's framing it as if, oh, was this person one of the good ones? Were they well-spoken? Did they have an impressive job? What schools did they go to? And if in this, digging about the person's past, they find out things like, oh, well, maybe they smoked weed or maybe they got suspended when they were in school, it seems as if the conversation changes where it becomes, oh, well, this person doesn't matter as much. And we could even see that with the gentleman who was a bird caller, I believe his last name is Cooper, and or a bird watcher, excuse me. And he was in, I believe it was Central Park or one of the parks in New York, and this woman is there with her dog, and he tells her, you shouldn't have the dog, and she says, I'm going to call the police, and it escalates from there. And afterwards, people were saying things like, oh, well, he's an Ivy League grad. Like, we should really listen to him because look at how impressive he is. When really it shouldn't take that. We don't have to get caught up in this idea of respectability, of being, quote unquote, one of the good ones, because we know that it doesn't save people. What's more respectable than sleeping in your home? What's more respectable than being a kid playing in the park? What's more respectable than going to get a bite to eat from, the dollar store or the corner store and walking home with your things that you've purchased, right? So we wanted to take this phrase, one of the good ones, that is sometimes used by people who might call themselves allies, people who mean well, but don't realize how harmful that language and that framing is.
I have friends who, this is some time ago, I don't know, but it probably still happens, who've told me about, hanging out with white friends and they say something, make some racist remark or something, and then turn to my friend and say, well, not you, you're one of the good ones. I mean, that's pretty blatant.
1,000%. Yeah. It becomes this conversation of people feeling like you are the exception to the rule, right? The rule is that your race, people who have your race or share your race are full of bad people, but you're one of the good ones, right? And it's not, it's really interesting to me how people don't realize that, but there are so many microaggressions that Black people and other marginalized people go through in these instances where it could be friends, people who mean well, who are using this harmful language. And it's our hope that people who call themselves allies, not only along, racial lines, but also if you say you're an ally to somebody who identifies as LGBTQ+, Like, what does that allyship look like? Are you only an ally when it's convenient? Do you stand silently by when something is happening, and then after the fact you go to the person and say, oh my gosh, I agree with everything you said, but then in the moment you didn't speak up for them or at least show that you were there to support? So our hope is that really one of the good ones will cause people who consider themselves to be allies to really reflect and do some introspection and consider the ways that they might have been harmful in the past and rectify it in the future so that it doesn't happen again.
Now, when you were talking about some of the examples, and, I know who you were referring to, and one of them is Trayvon Martin. Now, I understand he was really a large part of the inspiration for this book. Do you want to tell us that story?
Yes. So a few years ago, our grandmother's sister passed away, and when we were paying our final respects at the cemetery, we were walking by different names on the mausoleum wall where our aunt was going to be, and we were frozen in place because we saw a name that we recognized, and it was Trayvon Martin. And, we saw what had happened to him and all of the public conversation and outrage and discussions that were surrounding the case on TV over the few months that everything had happened in years. But it was just so shocking and grounding to see his final resting place. After everything was said and done, this young man lost his life in such a terrible, brutalized way at the hands of a man who was a vigilante, who felt he had the right to do so, who looked at him and felt that that was the action, the terrible action that he needed to do. And, like, the school that Trayvon Martin went to, that was our homeschool if we hadn't gone to another program. And he went to some of the same schools that our youngest sister went to at different times. And it was just such a terrible reminder how these people that we're talking about, they have homes and hometowns and families and loved ones and friends. And it's not just a hashtag on the internet. It's not just a Wikipedia page that gets updated when there's like a new court decision. These are people who have lost their lives and whose loved ones are now forced to contend with living their own lives without someone they thought was going to be there for a very, very long time. So our book is also about the people who are left behind, and it's about the people that we deem worthy of missing, which shouldn't be the case. Just being a human being on this earth should be enough to be respected and to be allowed to live without fear of someone killing you because of the way that you look.
I still can't understand how the perpetrator got off on that. It was not held responsible for murdering him. It boggles my mind. I cannot understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, honestly, because this is the nature of the country that we live in. And I think especially because we are, living through this pandemic and folks were unable to look away in the ways that they might have in the past as we witnessed what happened during this summer of racial reckoning, as it's being coined, for the summer of 2020. But these are conversations that have been happening for a very long time. Like us writing this book and it being published in 2021 is not the first time that people have conversations about respectability. I think it's the first time that people who might have been able to, to look away before are forced to see it. And one of the things, so Maritza and I, as was mentioned at the beginning of the interview, is that we're both PhD students. I'm at Howard University, Maritza's at University of Pennsylvania. But one of the things that I'm learning about now is about like the history of the Black press in America. And so much of what we're talking about today has been happening since Black people were brought to this country. In what everybody's saying is 1619, even though the date is not concrete. But yeah, it's just, these are not new conversations, but I do feel a bit more hopeful than I have in the past, because it really felt like a moment where people were kind of shaken out of their reverie, if you will. But I do want to caution, really, that we don't start congratulating ourselves too early, that we don't start saying, okay, there's a new administration, we have this happening, this means that all of our problems are done. Because that was exactly what happened when Obama became president. Everybody's like, okay, we're living in a post-racial society now. But it clearly wasn't the case. So
clearly
I
not.
just hope that, that people really consider what it means and understand that this is active work. It's constant work, and it does not end. And it's a reality that Black people have lived with, and hopefully now the country at large will start to contend with that and make real change.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guests today are Maika Moulite and Maritza Moulite, sisters and authors of One of the Good Ones. Mom, I want to give you a chance to ask some questions here.
Well, I had two questions. You studied at various universities, both of you, and when you were there, did you encounter a lot of incidences where you yourself were involved in things that were racist motivated, or how did you find that when you were studying there?
Well, right now we are first-year students, and we started this fall 2020. So we were in, quarantine and self-isolation. So all of our school has been online so far. But, what we wanted to tackle in this story is the fact that the things that happen to Tezzy and our characters in this book, it can happen to any Black person in this country because of the way that the system is set up to discriminate against individuals, and the way that we have been socialized to try to, it's like you're kind of guilty until proven worthy to exist, kind of like you have to kind of prove yourself by your education or your job or the way that you speak in a way that other people don't have to do. So this is a type of story that is kind of like your worst nightmare come to life.
Have you personally felt the pressure of, how do I say this, that everything you do, your entire race is judged on that, on what you as an individual do?
This is an interesting question, right? Because there's this idea, well, let's say it this way. When a Black person does something that's impressive or good or deemed, impressive or such by society, it becomes this person is the exception, right? And if something bad happens, it becomes more a testament to the entire quote-unquote race. So there are definitely instances where as Black writers and authors, we are contending with the fact that there is, there's growing, but there's not as much representation of Black people, Black characters in stories. And what does that mean when you are an author and you are writing these stories? Like, what is your responsibility? So we have to grapple with that, just because of the simple fact that there is not, the wide swath of opportunities or books for people to read that feature Black characters. So there are definitely times where, you can feel that pressure, if you will, but truly, we try not to. It's like I don't look at that as a negative for me, because I view the responsibility of it, and I carry that with me, and I know what it means when I walk into a space, especially as we are speaking to young people, and they look and they see me and Maritza, and they're like, wow, this is maybe the first author that I'm interacting with, and this is a Black person, or this is a Black person like me, right? Like, that is a big responsibility, but I take it on, and I step into that because that is a privilege that's been granted to me. That's the way that I do it personally. But yeah, there are definitely times when folks try to position it as a negative, and I have no problems with my Blackness. Like, I'm quite happy. So.
I just feel like it's unfair. Like, if I mess up, no one's going to say, well, of course she messed up. She's white. You know? It's like, it just doesn't seem very fair.
So, yeah. No, I understand that. Like, on the one hand, because of the way that the world is, like, you do choose to move forward, knowing that you carry certain responsibilities and one can take them on. But at the same time, the fact that a Black person or other marginalized person can do something and then it's an indictment of an entire community in the way that it is not for a white person is something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, for sure. Mom, you said you had another question?
Well, you know, I had this friend who lived in North Carolina, and he would on occasion say that some people there are still fighting the Civil War. What did he mean by it? But he never explained that. What do you think? What was that all about anyway?
Your voice is going out a little bit, so I can't quite make out your question.
Okay, I had this friend who lived in North Carolina, and he used to say that some people there were still fighting the Civil War, but he never really explained that to me. What do you think he meant by that? Is that something you hear?
I have only been to North Carolina once, so I can't speak to North Carolina. So I don't know that I can answer that question, but what I will say is that, you know, we're people who might have been able to look away before are seeing how there are two different Americas, right? Whether you're in North Carolina, California, Chicago, you know, rural America, it doesn't matter what. And we made a point of that in one of the good ones. Like, we have cities that are totally fictional, but we wanted to drive home the point that things that are happening can happen in anywhere USA. It's not limited to the South. It's not limited to rural areas. People are facing discrimination in Los Angeles, California, just as they're experiencing discrimination in Mobile, Alabama, right? So I think that there needs to be more nuanced conversations about what's happening across the country and not really limiting it to one area.
I personally have learned recently more about some aspects of Black history that I didn't know before during the Great Migration from the South to the North, and some of the obstacles that people faced in the North were just as bad, just as severe. So we had this idea that the North were the good guys in the Civil War, and in some respects I think that's true, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't just as racist in the North. There were massacres. You know, there was a massacre in Chicago, I think.
Yeah, there were. These are some of the things that I'm learning currently throughout my courses, but truly this is across the country. And what you'll find is that, you know, maybe while the South might have had Jim Crow explicitly, the North had it implicitly in the ways in which, you know, things were prevented for Black people to not be able to purchase certain homes, the types of jobs that people had access to, all of these different things. It serves as an implicit bias. It is a systemic issue of, what people are calling like a racial apartheid within America. It's ingrained in the system, and it's not just limited to the South. It's everywhere. So,
and in one of the good ones, you really are going into some of these aspects of history from the tour that they took following the Green Book. And I'm curious, did you go to those places yourselves?
We had planned to do a Route 66 tour because the New York Public Library, their Schomburg Center, actually has all of the Green Books digitized online, all 30 years of them, and this really cool tool where you can put in any address in the United States and another destination point, and it will give you potential stops that you could have taken if you were using the Green Book in 1948, for example.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so we planned out a whole itinerary, and we're putting things together. But then, we were all stuck at home because of COVID-19, which is where we should be. So It wasn't, but we were able to still create a podcast that we offer for teachers and librarians as a resource. And it's just an interesting podcast that really delves into the history of the Negro Motorist Green Book, why it was so necessary in the past, why some people have been inspired to create modern day versions of the Green Book through apps or websites in the 21st century because of, an acknowledgement that we have we have had many strides, but we do still have a very long way to go in terms of addressing the racial injustices in this country. Which was a really great opportunity to be able to talk to different experts around this topic.
How would someone find that podcast?
If you go to our website, MaikaandMaritza.com, then we have a podcast tab right at the front, and it's a mini series, so it's 3 episodes, and it talks about sundown towns. It talks about different cities and different people who have been inspired to talk about the Green Book or create their own relevant businesses or apps and history of the Green Book. Obviously, I think it's interesting, but
it sounds fascinating. And one of the good ones, you also are exploring being Black and LGBTQIA+. Did I get all the initials in there? Did that make it more challenging to try and encompass that type of discrimination as well?
No, it wasn't more difficult. Really what it comes down to is that as a person, you have multiple parts of your identity. And Kezi in our story is a Black lesbian girl, and she doesn't feel comfortable coming out to her family because she's growing up in this religious household. But really what we wanted to tackle with One of the Good Ones is about multiple versions, if you will, of allyship and how it can be harmful even if somebody shares your same racial identity, right? Because Kezi didn't feel comfortable coming out to her family. And, as Happy is learning more about her, she learns this, and she's trying to contend with the fact that her sister didn't feel comfortable coming out to her. So really, this story is about allyship in multiple forms and talking about, the intersections that we have in ourselves as a human being where, in one instance, it might be your Blackness that is up against, a type of pushback, or in other instances, it can be your sexual identity, or in other instances, it can be, your gender identity, right? Like there are different parts of ourselves. So we really wanted to tackle that throughout One of the Good Ones and to show how, depending on where you are and who you're with, different parts of yourself might come under the microscope.
But I don't want people listening to this to think that, this is a preachy story, because what it is a really good story. Something you want to know what happens next.
Yes, exactly. There's a thriller element that we kind of skirt around because we don't want to spoil anything. But there is a thriller component to One of the Good Ones, and it has a twist that will really have readers on the edge of their seat and wondering, like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? What does this mean about allyship and all of these different things? So we hope that
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Maika and Maritza. We're out of time, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for having us, and
thank you.
We'll pick up One of the Good Ones.
It's a great read. Highly recommended. Mom, do you have some final words?
I do. I'm the first part of this I'm quoting from the epilogue for One of the Good Ones, but existing as a human being on this earth should be enough to deserve respect and justice. Let us do all that we can in our own lifetimes to make that a reality for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. And look forward to your next book. I hope you
Thank
keep
you
writing
so
together.
much for having us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. Bye-bye.